Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So, in honor of it being my birthday, and therefore me being able to do pretty much whatever I want, those are the rules. I'm sure it's like codified somewhere. We are going to talk mostly about the Atlas 6 today. So in case you have missed anything, I posted a one-shot in Amortentia called Never Blink. So if you would like to read that, it is Percy and Pansy, and it is an expansion on the Ride or Die universe. It takes place after the Ride or Die epilogue, which you will probably figure out when one of the characters from Ride or Die makes an appearance. That is available to you. The Atlas 6 is, of course, available to you. I'm really, really excited to be holding it in my hands. This has just been like such a long process. This has been such a long time in the making. Longer even than most of my books. I think this is the book I've spent the most time on. Not necessarily this draft of this book, but I've been playing with these characters and this world for, I think like 3 years on and off. So yeah, this is a big deal for me anyway. So thank you to those of you who have expressed excitement about it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of writing it because this is the first of a few things. It's the first book that I wrote using an outline. I had never used an outline before, and it is also the first series I've ever written. So yeah, okay, I've got my cup of coffee. Let's see, do I have anything else to say? The new spell read for this month is a romance. We're reading The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Blake. I don't have my copy with me. It's actually Aurora's copy that I've had for a really long time. But we're going to read that. So I figure it's February. This is a romance month. And it was always my intention to read a historical romance. I think very highly of the historical romance genre. I think that it is frequently underrated. I know that contemporary romance is kind of having a moment right now where there's a lot of contemporary romances that are being treated a little bit more seriously. They're ending up on Reese Witherspoon's book club, or they're more acceptable to be read in public because they've got these little cartoon covers. And yes, I enjoy those books too. I think some of the most recent big ones are The Hating Game, The Proposal. But I really feel that historical romance has a tendency to get overlooked because these contemporary romances, they're kind of, genre bending in that, yeah, you can read them as part of a book club. They're contemporary, so you can recommend them to your friend who doesn't read, fan fiction or romance, and she might still enjoy it. There is just so much craft in historical romance. I mean, the dialogue is usually so good. The characters are really well-rounded and really strong, and it's also a particular kind of skill to create a satisfying happy ending that doesn't feel overwrought. And also those books have a tendency to be quietly very feminist. I'm a really big fan of Tessa Dare. I've said before that I love Cat Sebastian. I've never read an Olivia Blake before, but I'm looking forward to it. So I'm excited about this book. Should be a relatively easy read, so hopefully this is fun for us in February. About the Atlas 6. So where to start? So I was saying that this book is the first one I ever wrote with an outline, but I've described my process of outlining before in that it is what I call a living outline. So initially all I did, the outline looked exactly like this table of contents. So it just had 8 sections. And I was like, this is what I think is, I'm going to break my plot down into these 8 parts. And they kind of correspond to the rising action and the climax and the falling action and all that. They loosely correspond that way. And then, so right before I would get to a certain part, I would sit down and kind of pre-outline what I thought was going to happen in that section. So when I first started writing, nothing was outlined. I just knew which characters I was going to use and kind of what I thought was going to happen at approximately the climax of the story, which ended up not at all being what I thought it was going to be. This is why I don't usually outline. But this is why it was really helpful for me to use an outline, that it was okay to change and adapt as I went. Because if I had just tried to say how I thought that the book was going to go and then write according to what I thought was going to happen, I would have had to just throw the outline out. So it was definitely much easier for me to just say, these are what the basic parts are going to be, and then each time we reached that new part in the plot, then I sat down and thought about, okay, what needs to happen to take me from point A to point B just here in this portion of the plot in order to get from the beginning to the end. So that was a really interesting process for me. I've mentioned a few times now that by the time I got to the end, this outline was like quite long, 6 pages long or something, just with everything that little like notes of dialogue that I was like, okay, I know I'm going to have these two characters have this conversation. I think one of them needs to say this in order for this plot to make sense, and I need this to happen in order to tie all these things together. Writing the Atlas 6 was a really interesting process for me. I actually really struggled with it because there's a lot of stuff that I couldn't tie together as neatly as I usually do. So when there's a standalone novel, the concept of Chekhov's gun, which is that if you introduce a gun at the beginning of a play, then that gun had better go off, because otherwise why are you writing something unnecessary into fiction? I tried to keep my fiction as minimalist as possible, to the extent that every detail is there for a reason. That if you were to, open up the book and see its construction, you would see the way that all of these threads are connected. Ideally, when you finish the book, you will have some questions, but also some theories. There is enough in the book for you to sort of guess what might happen next. This is what was fun for me about the Harry Potter books, is that my best friend and I would use the evidence of what had already been released in the books to guess what was going to happen in the next book. It was his theory that Harry was a Horcrux, and we talked about this at length. So that's kind of what I was going for. There is enough in this book for you to develop theories about what you think will happen next. Mr. Blake was the first person to finish it because he's my science consultant. So he finished the book, and then he kind of looks at me. I think I was working at the time. I was doing something else. And he looks at me and he's like, so who's the bad guy? Like, who's the villain here? And I was like, isn't that the question? Isn't that always the question? Like, who's the good guy and who is the bad guy? Who has, the most sincere agenda? Or who has the correct agenda? He wanted me to spoil the end of the series, which I did not do. Which brings me neatly to the topic of writing for something that is intended to have follow-up. So that was, or I guess I have been talking about that. But yeah, it was strange. It was definitely a little bit difficult because I want the satisfaction of people being like, oh, this is how this stuff connects, and I can't actually do that yet. Introducing the theme but not bringing it full circle yet was like a little bit of a challenge for me. It was definitely an interesting process. I'm really excited about kind of moving forward in this world. I mean, I've described a few times that this book is a little bit like The Secret History in terms of the fact that it is, dark academia a little bit, and it's kind of about, once you gain a little knowledge, you always want more. So it's kind of this addiction of, okay, we have this amount of power, we know that we can have this amount of power, what choices do we make in order to become the people that we're going to become? So I don't know if you got, people have asked me before about writing ensemble casts, so this is a cast of 6. I really sort of subscribe to this concept of naturalism and balance, and really there is someone, for every character, there is someone to balance that character in this book. So presumably, if you feel you align with one character, there will be a character that you really feel strongly against. However, you should, in terms of writing an ensemble story, be able to, if not sympathize with all of the characters, at least understand where they're coming from. Their motivations should make sense. So that's obviously not very specific information in terms of how to write an ensemble, but definitely the priority is whether or not you agree with the character whose point of view you're currently in during the story. You can see how they are connecting the dots and what they might do next based on what has been established about them. So I have talked about Callum and Tristan before. Now I wanted to read you a little bit from Parisa's perspective. She's a very interesting character. She makes a very compelling villain, but I do feel that Parisa is one of those characters that's a little bit like Pansy, where there's a little bit more to her than you see initially. And she is powerful in a way that the other characters are not. And she's also weak in a way that the other characters are not. So it was really, she's just very complex. And as you know, I like to write complicated female characters, and Parisa is definitely one of those. But I just wanted to read you a little bit of her introduction to the plot. Okay, so this is from Parisa's chapter in part 1, Weapons. She'd been sitting in the bar in her favorite black dress, sipping a martini. She always came to do this alone. For a time, she'd been in the habit of having girlfriends around, but ultimately determined they were too noisy, disruptive, often jealous, too, which Parisa couldn't abide. She'd had one or two female friends at school in Paris and had once been close to her siblings in Tehran, but since then she'd determined she was better as a singular object. That made sense to her, ultimately. People who lined up to see the Mona Lisa typically couldn't name the paintings hanging nearby, and there was nothing wrong with that. There were quite a lot of words for what Parisa was, which was something she supposed most people would not approve. Perhaps it went without saying that Parisa didn't put a lot of stock in approval. She was talented and smart, but above that, at least according to everyone who'd ever looked at her, she was beautiful, and being gifted approval for something that had been handed to her by some fortuitous arrangement of DNA instead of earned by her own two hands wasn't something she felt necessary to either idolize or condemn. She didn't rail against her looks, didn't give thanks for them either. She simply used them like any other tool, like a hammer or a shovel or whatever else was necessary to complete the requisite task. Besides, disapproval was nothing worth thinking about. The same women who might have disapproved were quick to fawn over her diamonds, her shoes, her breasts, all of which were natural, never synthetic, not even illusioned. Whatever they wanted to call Parisa, at least she was authentic. She was real, even if she made a living on false promises. Really, there was nothing more dangerous than a woman who knew her own worth. Parisa watched the older men in the corner, the ones in the expensive suits who were having a business meeting. She'd listened for a few minutes to the subject of conversation. After all, not everything was sex. Sometimes insider trading was the easier option, and she was smart enough to serve multiple threads, but ultimately lost interest as the business concept was fundamentally unsound. The men themselves, however, remained intriguing. One of them was toying with his wedding ring and fussing internally about his wife. Boring. One of the others was clearly harboring some sort of unresolved sexual angst about the boring, fussy one, which was more interesting, albeit unhelpful for her purposes. The last one was handsome, probably rich, a tan where his wedding ring should have been. Parisa shifted in her chair, crossing one leg delicately over the other. The man looked up, catching a glimpse of her thigh. Well, he was certainly willing. That much was clear. She looked elsewhere, not sure the man would be ending his business meeting anytime soon. In the meantime, she'd occupy her thoughts with someone else's. Maybe the wealthy woman in the back corner who looked likely to cry any minute. No, too depressing. There was always the bartender, who certainly knew how to use his hands. He pictured them on her already, traveling over a fairly accurate mental illustration of her hips, only she wouldn't get anything out of that. An orgasm, surely, but what good was that? An orgasm she could have on her own without becoming the girl who fucks bartenders. If anyone was going to be involved in Parisa's life, they were going to bring money, power, or magic. Nothing else would do. She angled herself towards the dark-skinned man at the end of the bar, contemplating the silence that came from his head. She hadn't seen him come in, which was unusual. A Median then, or at least a witch. That was interesting. She watched him toy with a slim card, tapping it against the bar, and frowned at the words, Atlas Blakely, caretaker. Caretaker of what? The problem with being a smart girl was being naturally curious. Parisa turned away from the business meeting, aiming herself instead towards Atlas Blakely, and fiddling with their respective positions in the room, turning the volume up. She focused in on his mind and saw 6 people. No, 5. 5 people, without faces. Extraordinary magic. Oh, yes, he was definitely a Median, and so were they, it seemed. He felt a kinship with one of the 5. One of them was a prize, something the man, Atlas, had recently won. He felt a bit smug over it. 2 of them were a set. They came together. They didn't like being shoved in like twins in a too small womb, but too bad, that's what they were. One was a vacancy, a question, the edge of a narrow cliff. Another was the answer, like an echo, though she couldn't quite see why. She tried to see their faces clearly, but couldn't. They warped in and out of view, beckoning her closer. Parisa peered around, pacing a little inside his thoughts. They seemed curated, a bit like a museum, as if they'd been intended for her to view in a particular order. A long process of selection, then a mirror. 5 frames with hazy portraits, and then a mirror. Parisa looked at her own face and felt a jolt, startled. At the end of the bar, the man rose to his feet, placing the card in front of her, and without him detailing anything aloud, she already knew why he'd given it to her. She'd spent long enough in his mind to understand it, and she realized now that he'd willingly let her in. In 1 hour, his thought said, the card would take her somewhere important. It was obviously the most important place in the world to this man, whoever he was. That bit Parisa suspected was her interpretation, as it was slightly fuzzier. She knew instinctively that whatever it was, it would be more worthwhile than the man having the business meeting. That man had recently repaired stitching in his suit. It had been refitted. It wasn't new. A man wore a new suit to a business meeting like this if he could afford it, and that man couldn't. Parisa sighed in resignation, picking up the card from the bar. An hour later, she sat in a room with Atlas Blakely and the 5 people she'd seen hazily represented in his mind without either of them speaking a word to each other, friendly or otherwise. She watched the handsome Latin boy, definitely a boy, he was obsessed with the girl sitting next to Parisa, who was tinted with inexperience, decide she was beautiful, and she smiled to herself, knowing perfectly well she could eat that boy alive, and he'd let her. He'd be fun for a day or so, maybe, but this seemed bigger than that. This seemed much more important. The blonde South African was interesting. He was eyeing the Englishman, Tristan, with extreme curiosity, possibly even something ravenous. Good, Parisa thought, pleased. She didn't like men like him. He'd want her to shout his name, to scream about his dick, to say things like, "Oh, baby, yes, how do you do it? How do you make me feel like this?" And that was a chore. It rarely ended in anything worthwhile. Rich people like him typically held tight to their wallets, and experience had taught her that did her no good. Besides, the 6 of them were equals here. He had nothing to offer her, except perhaps loyalty, and he wasn't the type to give it easily. He was used to getting his way, which she could see from observing the functions of his thoughts was something he did with at least some level of intention. Parisa Kamali had never wanted to be under anyone's thumb, and she certainly wouldn't start now. The boy, too, was probably useless, which was disappointing. He was obviously wealthy and certainly not unattractive. Nicolas, she thought with satisfaction, rolling his name around in her head like she might have done with him, whispering it to the inch of skin just below the lobe of his ear. But he obviously tired quickly of things that were too easily won. Not Parisa's style. The girl he was fixated on was equally easy to discard, though Parisa had been with girls before and rarely ruled them out. She spent the better portion of last month, in fact, with a wealthy mortal heiress who'd bought Parisa this outfit, these boots, this purse. People were all the same, really, when you got to the core of them, and Parisa always did. It was Parisa's business, seeing things she wasn't supposed to see. In this case, though, this particular girl was unequivocally hopeless. She had a boyfriend she seemed to actually like. She had good intentions, too, which were the most unfortunate. Always indicative of someone not easily put to use. The girl, Libby, was so good she was no good at all. Parisa moved on from her quickly. Raina, the naturalist with the nose ring, was easily the most threatening presence in the room. She radiated raw power, which in Parisa's experience was the mark of someone who shouldn't be messed with. Parisa put her in a mental box marked "Do Not Disturb" and resolved to stay out of her way. Then there was Tristan, the Englishman, whom Parisa liked within minutes of slipping unobtrusively into his thoughts. There was a festering anger in his head, beating dully like a tribal drum. It was obvious he didn't know why he was here, but now that he was, he wanted to punish everyone in the room, himself included. Parisa liked that. She found it interesting, or at least relatable. She watched Tristan notice everything that was off in the room, all the illusions everyone else had used to hide various parts of themselves, which varied from Libby's little spot of concealer on a stress blemish hidden by her fringe to the false golden-flecked tips of Callum's hair, and marveled a little at his instant dismissal. He was unimpressed. He'd change his mind, Parisa thought, if she decided she wanted him to. Which wasn't to say she did, necessarily. Again, there was nothing in it for her to pursue someone who had no leverage. Perhaps the most beneficial connection was, in fact, the caretaker, Atlas. Parisa was already calculating how much work it would take to win Atlas Blakely's interest when the door opened behind them and she and the others turned. "Ah, Dalton," said Atlas. A narrow-hipped, elegantly lean man, perhaps a few years older than Parisa and dressed in a clean, starched Oxford with lines as precise as the sleek part of his raven-black hair, nodded in reply. "Atlas," he said in a low voice, his gaze falling on Parisa. "Yes," Parisa thought. "Yes, you." He thought she was beautiful, easy, everyone did. He tried not to look at her breasts. Wasn't really working. She smiled at him and his thoughts raced, then went blank. He was momentarily silent, and then Atlas cleared his throat. "Everyone, Dalton Ellery," Atlas said, and Dalton nodded curtly, looking over Parisa's head to glance with a somewhat forced smile at the others in the room. "Welcome," he said. "Congratulations on being tapped for entry to the Alexandrian Society." His voice was smooth and buttery despite his posture being slightly stiff. His broad shoulders, the result of considerable craftsmanship, for which Parisa was certain his shirts were especially tailored, appeared to lock uncomfortably in place. He was clean-shaven, meticulous. He looked fanatical about cleanliness, and she wanted to press her tongue to the nape of his artfully tapered neck. "I'm sure you all understand by now what an honor it is to be here. Dalton is a member of our most recently initiated class," Atlas said. "He'll be guiding you through the process, helping you transition into your new positions." Parisa could think of a few positions she'd need no assistance with whatsoever. She slid into Dalton's subconscious, probing around. Would he want to chase, or would he prefer her to be the aggressor? He was blocking something from her, from everyone, and Parisa frowned, surprised. It wasn't unheard of to practice some method of defense against telepathy, but it was an effort, even for a Median with a considerable amount of talent. Was there someone else in the room Dalton was expecting could read his mind? She got a flicker of a smile from Atlas, who arched a brow at her and blinked. Oh, she thought, and Atlas' smile broadened. Perhaps now you know what it's like for other people, Atlas said, and then added carefully, and I would advise you to stay away from Dalton. I will be advising him to do the same. Does he usually follow your instructions? Parisa asked. His smile was unerring. Yes, as should you. And the others? I can't prevent you from doing whatever it is you'll do over the course of the year, but even so, there are boundaries, Miss Kamali. She smiled in concession, wiping her mind clean. Defense, offense, she was equally skilled, and in response, Atlas nodded once. Well, he said, shall we discuss the details of your initiation then? So, part of the reason I wanted to bring up Parisa is because I think people have mentioned before that sometimes my female characters have more anger than others, and Parisa is very, very angry. And I think I tend to write that into the characters who they have qualities of both beauty and anger, because there's something about beauty that involves a certain possessiveness from men. I think that to me, it follows that someone who is in her position of being exceptionally beautiful resents that. I'm not really going to bother tying this together because it doesn't tie together loosely, but I just wanted to talk for a second about, so for my birthday, I decided I wanted to go to the beach. It was a nice day, so I was going to go to the beach and read by myself. So I did. I brought my book. I finished Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. It was pretty good. I did appreciate that she spent time on the diagnosis of endometriosis because, for one thing, that's a type of pain that only a woman could write, and for another thing, it's pretty underrepresented, I think, in fiction and in life. I loved the book. I did not like the story. Anyway, so I was reading Conversations with Friends, and then I got a little cold. So after probably about an hour and a half of reading by myself, I started to put my clothes back on, and put my book away. And then this guy came up to me and sat next to me. And it was very startling. I was in the process of taking off my bikini top. I had put my dress on and I was taking off the bikini top, and he sits next to me. So he sits down and he says, I noticed you're here reading alone. And I think, oh my God, men. Can you imagine, you go somewhere to read alone and a man thinks that, you want company? But then it got worse, because then he said, yeah, I've just been watching you for an hour. And I noticed you just hadn't even moved. You're just sitting here reading your book. And I was like, at the time I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to get away. And it's not I think the thing that was so frustrating about it is he was upset when I told him I was leaving. And he kept trying to, he wanted to shake my hand. He wanted to know what my name was. And I felt really uncomfortable, and I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on it at the time because I just wanted to leave. And I just had this ringing thought, it's my birthday. Why would you do this to me? That was kind of at odds with the idea that he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. I think he probably thought he was being nice to me. And I think that it always brings me back to the story I've told before about my friends telling me when a man had told me to smile and I reacted badly, and they were like, why wouldn't you just smile? And I had all this playing in my head of just smile and just leave, and it'll be easier. Then, I honestly couldn't put into words the way I felt, which was I felt threatened because, I thought I was just having a nice day reading by myself, and then it turned out that this man had been watching me for basically the whole time I was there, and I just suddenly felt very unsafe, and it just made me think about just what a precarious position we're in as women, how vulnerable we are. I spent the whole rest of the day in a little bit of a fog, just feeling like my whole day had been a little bit ruined. And I don't really know why I'm telling you this, except to say that if you're angry, I'm so angry. I'm just so angry, and it's not because he came over to talk to me. It's that behavior is so normalized that it wouldn't it wouldn't register to him that I would be threatened by it. It didn't even cross his mind that I would find that to not only be invasive, but that it would make me feel unsafe. And of course nothing happened. And it wasn't, it wasn't a big deal. But at the same time, as I was walking away and I was telling myself, this is not a big deal, why can't I shake it off? I think someone needs to say that it is a little bit of a big deal. Not that one instance, but the fact that it is habitual, that it's something that it's normalized. Normalized is the only word I can think to use about it. And so I guess, I don't know if this is something that people think, but if you ever wonder why my female characters are angry, that's why. There was just something about, like, there's a part in Sweet Bitter that's the same thing where she tries to tell this man she takes herself out to lunch, she wants to have oysters at the oyster bar, and this man tries to talk to her, and she tells him, listen, my job is, like, very noisy, and I just want, like, quiet. And he still kind of pushes her, and he doesn't leave her alone until she says, I have a boyfriend. And the same thing when this guy was talking to me, I wanted to say, I'm married. But then I thought, why would that be the only reason he leaves me alone? Why do I have to say I belong to another man? Why is that the only reason that you would leave me to my own serenity of doing what I wanted on my birthday, which was to be alone and to read this book in the sun and look at the ocean? And now you've done this to me, and I can't really even explain to you what you've done. And it's frustrating that we live in a world where I'm the bitch in this situation because I wasn't nice to you, because I didn't smile at you. This is just going to feed into your narrative of how you're a nice guy who can't get whatever you want from women. And anyway, I don't know if that story is going to mean anything to you. I don't want any sympathy or anything. I think I just wanted to talk about the fact that it shouldn't have to be like that. It just shouldn't have to be like that. And I think I actually didn't think I was going to tell this story until I was reading Parissa's section, and I just thought about how, Parissa probably would have said something. Parissa would have done something for sure. And I just felt powerless. And I don't want to feel powerless, and I don't want you to feel powerless. So I guess if it helps you to know that that's something that I think about or that other women experience, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. There's also a storyline on sex education that kind of relates. Amy's storyline. I'm not all the way through the season, but it's just very interesting. It's very interesting what we can become okay with until we decide it's not okay. So yeah, this is a weird place to end. But anyway, so that's the story of what happened on my birthday, and also my book is available. So anyway, my book is available. I hope you guys like it. I don't, this is kind of a genre bender for me. I don't really know how to explain it or describe it because it doesn't really feel like other things I've written before. We'll say that if you like the secret society aspect of how to win friends and influence people and the, relationships with the Peverell brothers, you may be more interested in this. Yeah, it's hard for me to think of what it's most like. I don't think it is like anything else. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys think about it. I guess I should probably stop talking. I've talked so much. Okay. Anyway. Oh, and I do have to say that I will be out of town for a wedding next week, so we're going to take a week off. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will answer them the following week. I have been hinting for a while that I have a sex topic to discuss. So if you want to talk about sex, we can do that. I know that those questions never get exhausted, which is fair. So anyway, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.